There are also an impact of feminist theory on sentencing and on criminal policy models as well. As to the latter, it seems that restorative justice, itself an alternative to retributivism after the failure of the state-obligated social rehabilitation and special prevention in general during the 80s, is more akin to specifics of feminism like community-based elaboration of the conflict arising out of a crime, dialogue, negotiation, recognition of harm and peacemaking procedures, and the like, specifics having inspired the whole concept of diversion thus far. Is this, though, appropriate in case of sexual or racial violence? That the punitive system turns counterproductive does not mean that punitiveness is to be dispensed with entirely, I'm afraid. Stigmatization and expressive sanctioning are components of paramount importance when dealing with violence against women, or also against children, or against foreigners, because it is obvious that sexualized violence offers no common ground based on which one might try to settle a dispute. Such behavior is a non-negotiable behavior. Besides, the visions of community are fading away in an anomic globalized capitalism, promoting private prudentialism instead of any notion of social bonds. In parallel, the abolitionist insight in the marginalizing effects of state-based punitive system proves somehow displaced concerning violence against women. They are the powerless, whereas the offender, irrespective of his social class, materializes the role of a hegemonic masculinity, which has to be effectively sanctioned if emancipatory normative principles are to be taken seriously. Now, one can, borrowing from Braithwaite's work, argue that shaming, in contrast to state-based stigma, may allow for reintegration by focusing more on the act than on the agent. True as this might be, criminal process should remain at least the apex of a differentiated sanctioning system, I think. What foregoing penalization would amount to would be, as Barbara Hudson puts it, the toleration of intolerance as it is represented in sexually violent and humiliating behavior, unless one conceives of restoration as something totally different from another merely diversionary procedure. Then, of course, you will have a rather tough system of sufficiently formalized social control, tending not to escort as a pre-stage, but to totally replace the state-based criminal law system regarding sexual crimes. And inside this system, exclusion of the offender, his outness, cannot be itself excluded as a possibility, with all due respect to what Barbara Hudson is hinting at in this regard. The demand to regain real individualized sentencing does not negate this possibility. Take trafficking as example. What can shaming contribute to there? Where the modus operandi is heinous, the crime itself is systemic, the law symbolical and hypocrite, and its enforcement poor. How can reintegrative models deal with such a genocidal crime pattern? So then, what is better than all these punitiveness-based systems is not another alternative to state-based sanctioning of criminality against women, but rather the total transformation of the whole social and political edifice. I'm coming to my conclusion. This transformation goes hand in hand with radical political change, and feminism cannot do without being radically political again, without reviving what spiritualized gender studies and fundamentalist anti-essentialism risk to miss. Political strategy, even if quasi-essentialist, along the lines of, for instance, Gayatri Spivak's respective proposal, is strongly required. Feminism should become again politically tainted. It has to cease being reticent about using normative criteria, notwithstanding that these criteria are value-imbued, situated in concrete ethics, or implying the self-presence of agential subjects, thought of to have been effaced long ago by a merciless deconstruction. And it has to use them in polemical political manner on behalf of the oppressed and marginalized, because, as Walter Benjamin used to repeat, it is only for the sake of the hopeless that hope has been given to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Hassan, you put the screen?
Yeah, sure. Okay, Maeve.
Okay, good morning. I really don't know where to start. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a professor of law, legal studies and criminology at Carleton University in Ottawa. The person I'm going to speak about is Hassan Diab. He's actually a colleague of mine. I didn't know Hassan until I think it was about March of last year. And prior to that, I really had no interest in extradition law. It was just something I hadn't really thought about. But once I met Hassan and some of his supporters, I was really shocked to learn what he was going through, and it prompted me to look into his case and to begin to discover what I consider to be some of the unfairness with respect to extradition law. And I'm going to use this case to try and provide you some examples of what's wrong with it. One person I want to thank is David Kosh. He's a graduate student in journalism at Carleton University, and he helped me to put together a lot of the background material for what I'm going to talk about. I guess other people I'd like to thank are other colleagues at the Carleton University. Although Hassan Diab had his contract terminated by the university, his immediate colleagues, notably in the Department of Sociology as well as Criminology and Law, have been very supportive of him. One of his colleagues put up $100,000 bail for Hassan Diab. So on the one hand, the administration at the university has given him the boot, but his immediate colleagues are hugely supportive. One of Canada's leading legal experts on extradition law is a lawyer in Vancouver called Gary Botting. And this is what he has to say. Extradition is not designed to be fair. It is only designed to be efficient, to deliver up an accused person to the requesting country with a minimum of fuss. Individual rights are often no match for international cooperation. In short, with extradition, an emphasis on diplomacy appears to greatly outweigh that on accused persons' human rights. So diplomacy is considered more important than human rights. As of June 2011, following an extradition hearing, Justice Moranger ordered that Hassan Diab be deported to France at the request of the French authorities. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. The matter then proceeded to the offices of the Canadian Justice Minister, Rob Nicholson, who as of April 2012 upheld the extradition order. In his lengthy narrative responding to arguments that had been made, the following statement was made by the Justice Minister, and I quote, "The guilt or innocence of a person sought is not a consideration in the extradition context." So guilt or innocence is not a consideration when it comes to extradition. I find that a very scary notion. So a little about Hassan Diab. He was born in Lebanon in 1953. He's been formally exposed to the problematic aspects of the extradition process at great personal cost. Formally accused in November 2008 by the French authorities of the bombing of a synagogue in Paris that took place almost 30 years earlier, on the 3rd of October 1980, Hassan Diab has described his experiences as Kafkaesque and as devastating. He describes the psychological effects of what he has been and is being put through as including despair and agony. He says, "My life and career have been destroyed." On the financial front, and I'll have more to say about this later, Hassan and his spouse, Rania Tafali, are, quote, "totally broke." So a few more words about Hassan Diab. As mentioned, he was born in Lebanon. He did several degrees in Lebanon. He came to the States and he got his doctorate in sociology from Syracuse University in the mid-1990s. As of 1993, he became a Canadian citizen. So that's an important point. that Hassan Diab is a citizen of Canada. He taught in Lebanon and various other places in the Middle East. He also taught sociology at Syracuse. He taught at the University of Manitoba in Canada. And as of about 2006, 2007, he was teaching as a sessional instructor at both the University of Ottawa and at Carleton University. As a sessional instructor, it meant he's not a tenure stream professor, but teaching at both universities. The first Hassan Diab heard about this was in October of 2007. Hassan Diab was approached by a journalist with the French newspaper Le Figaro. The journalist asked Hassan Diab if he knew that he was a suspect in the Copernic Street bombing in 1980. That bombing was targeting a synagogue. It so happened that the service that day went on a bit longer than usual, so the bombing didn't kill the original targets in the synagogue, but 4 people passing by were killed, and at least 40 people in the synagogue were injured. When Hassan was confronted by this journalist saying, "Do you know you're an accused suspect in this bombing?" he said he knew nothing about it, and his immediate reaction was that it was a case of misplaced identity. Apparently the surname, the family name Diab, is very common, and he explained to the reporter, "In my own class at the university, we had 4 Diabs, and people getting checks and stuff mixed up." He said if the requests were looking for something from him, that they should do so openly. Not long afterwards, Hassan and his wife, who is also a PhD in sociology, and another colleague at Carleton, she does have tenure in sociology at Carleton, they're both Muslim and Arab, they noticed that they were being followed in Ottawa. They actually put in calls to the Ottawa police saying we seem to be being followed and here's the registration plate of the car, but they never got any response. They were afraid and really did not know what to do. It would later emerge that it was the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that were following them around and that were interpreting their reactions as being suspicious. And this is one of the things that comes out in the case and sometimes makes them afraid to talk, is that no matter what you say, they're afraid it'll be twisted and used against them. One example, they were calling each other internally within the university. It so happens that the combination of numbers that you use is the same as the country code for Lebanon. So the RCMP are reporting they're making phone calls to Lebanon when they were both in the same university and making calls to each other. This, what they describe as an intimidation process, resulted in a rift in their relationship and they temporarily separated. On November 13th, 2008, at the request of the French authorities, Hassan Diab was arrested and accused of crimes that could result in a maximum life sentence in prison in France. In early December of 2008, his initial request for bail was denied and he continued to be detained in the Ottawa Carleton Detention Centre.